Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'll be giving my usual take on Prime Minister's questions as Keir Starmer pressed Johnson on his general lack of a plan to deal with our economic problems, as well as basically compared him to Jabba the Hutt. Ian Blackford launched the next phase of the SNP's plans for another referendum, which I'll be discussing the latest on in the next few days, and Boris Johnson described Brexit as a foolish project. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So before you all panic, when I said Boris Johnson described Brexit as being a foolish project, he didn't do so by name. He was actually responding to a question about Scottish independence and said, what could be more foolish than a project that creates trade barriers in the UK? His brain rebelling against the Brexit he knows was insanity, or a not so clever attempt to suggest that the problems of Brexit are down to other things entirely? Answers on a postcard. But yes, Starmer's questions first of all. Last week, it was suggested, particularly by his own MPs, which is more serious, that it was a little bit flat. Now, I thought the line of question I said last week was good, but his MPs wanted the theatre. They got it this week. They got it this week. I'll have to show some. I don't normally do this. I'll have to show some clips to show what I mean at various points. And as I say, at one point, he actually did compare Boris Johnson to Jabba the Hutt. But it was essentially the economy in his sights. First of all, he sort of he wove it all in. You know, I'll say immediately, I'm glad he's steering well clear of the obvious culture war traps and focusing in on what are the prime concerns of the target voters. Absolutely essential. However, I will reiterate what I said yesterday. It's not enough to attack the government's performance. He has to bang the drum for what Labour would do differently, and to back up his credentials, bang the drum for what Labour did do in government before these Tory saboteurs were let loose on the country. And you know, if it's the case that he doesn't want to be too detailed in his policies, and that's absolutely fine in opposition, wait until you need to write your manifesto, not a problem. Like, the government always need to be able to say what they need to do now because they're the government. The opposition don't. They don't have to do that. But if you don't want to be too detailed in your policies, at least explain what Labour have done in the past. So Starmer's first question was to ask why the UK is on the lowest growth of any major economy other than Russia. And Johnson responded by saying it's because we came out of the pandemic early. So yeah, the reason our economy is knackered is because we did dead good with the pandemic, isn't it? And in actual fact, this is this nonsense. As well as not answering the question, Johnson, he was alluding to the fact that our current growth was tipped into contraction on the back of dropping mass COVID testing. But here's the thing. First of all, why didn't we see more growth in other areas to balance that out? After all, the Tories claim we moved out of the pandemic measures to boost the economy. That's what they said. That's what they said. We're going to move out of these measures and it'll boost the economy. So now they're saying that the economy is shrinking because we moved out of these measures at the time we did. If they're not saying that moving out of the pandemic measures, if they're saying it failed to do that, they've been proven wrong, haven't they? Secondly, Starmer wasn't asking about the current economic figures. He was asking about the current projection. Indeed, Starmer made this point. He said Johnson answered the question put to him, and he asked it again. Why is the UK on for lower growth? And then Boris Johnson decided he was bored with questions and came up with his own. He does this quite frequently when he's in trouble, though it usually takes longer than the second question to break him. But he does get irritable at questions. He doesn't like them. Why don't you ask me questions that I want to be asked about, he often retorts. So instead of answering the clarified question, he babbled something in Latin, sorry, I'm not looking it up, and then went on about the rail strikes. He tried to suggest Starmer just denounced them. It's the problem, all the problems with this country is that you won't back me up. That's what he says. But all he pointed out was that Johnson was in government, not him. And Starmer then said, look, I don't want the strikes to go ahead, but you do. He said the Prime Minister does want the strikes to go ahead so he can have a moan at Labour. You know, he suggested that Johnson was attempting Jedi mind tricks. This is where he tried to get his MPs on. Says attempting Jedi mind tricks on the public and that they wouldn't work.
He thinks he can perform Jedi mind tricks on the country. These aren't the droids you're looking for. No rules were broken. The economy is booming. The problem is, the Force just isn't with him anymore. He thinks he's Obi-Wan Kenobi. The truth is he's Jabba the Hutt.
He said the economy has shrunk for the second month in a row, and how is it helping for the Prime Minister to stick his head in the sand about it? Then Johnson moved from answering his own questions, sometimes in a foreign language, because, you know, he's a big fan of clarity and transparency, so he says, and he decided to go back to misleading instead. He said that employment is at a record high. Now, I noticed he stopped trying to say there are a record number of people in work, because he kept using that, and people kept calling it out. No, there aren't. That's a lie. You know, so that lie's obviously been called out too many times. He's moved to a different one. So when I watched his answer, for all I knew, actual employment really was at a record high. I didn't know. But once you look at the overall numbers in work, which employment is only a part of, remember, there's a lot of self-employed people in this country, the figures look quite bad. But never take anything that Boris Johnson says at face value. I wasn't just going to do... You look it up. I looked it up. Didn't take long. Of course it didn't take long. There's just been a report from the Office for National Statistics, and they said that the employment rate was up on the last few months, but it was still lower than before the pandemic. In fact, it's good that I did look it up, because I saw another little interesting summary on that report. The employment rate might be up on the past few months, but the economic activity is still down, which is, of course, why our economy is shrinking. It was, however, higher than just before the pandemic, but we were just leaving the EU at that point, weren't we? Johnson also said that investment levels are higher than in, say, France, he said. Well, the latest figures continue to show that France actually attracts more investment than the UK. The UK used to have the most foreign inward investment of all EU members, absolutely. But that started to decline from 2016. Anyone remember what happened then? Must have been something big. Starmer then pushed at the other end of the economic concerns, taxes. He pointed out that Johnson was in denial over the problems and that it was making it worse with his tax rises. Again, important line for Labour, because a lot of Tory voters are under the misapprehension that taxes are low under the Tories. Hey, really? Nonsense, of course. You get lower taxes when you've got more growth. So the party that will give you more growth will give you lower taxes. And we've not had high growth since Labour were last in power. He also asked, when did screwing business go from a flippant comment to an economic policy? He obviously tidied up the language. Again, pushing Labour's credentials as best for business. Shouldn't actually be that hard on this one, because whenever Keir Starmer or Rachel Reeves gives speeches to business groups, they do what you'd normally do for such a speech. They go over the problems and they set out solutions. When Boris Johnson gives a speech to business leaders, he talks about cartoon characters and whines about wokeness. Labour also know that the Tories will not have the room to cut taxes by much before the next election either. There's simply not the growth to allow it. Johnson understands that as well. He tried saying that under Labour taxes go up. He said that on average people are getting a £330 tax cut. Another lie. The Tories' tax cut plans, which is like the penny off income tax, would mean an average of less than £200 as it happens. But that is just one form of tax. They've increased like over a dozen others. So the net effect is still a net increase in taxes under the Tories. Johnson also said that Labour have made promises worth £94 billion and that's why unemployment is high under Labour. Now, a few thoughts here. First of all, when Johnson announces billions in spending plans, it's a good thing apparently. Oh, it's marvellous. But when Labour do it, apparently it's bad. How does that work? Second of all, so Boris Johnson said with Labour governments, the unemployment is higher at the end of their time than at the beginning. Now, it is technically true that the unemployment in the UK was higher at the end of Labour's time in office than at the start. But a few things. This was while still recovering from the global crash. It was only a little bit higher as well. But if you look at the figures just before that, when Labour had still been in power for over 10 years, it was lower. So they brought it down. Secondly, the Conservatives fiddle unemployment figures by removing people off these numbers, even if they're not paid work. Like 0 hours contracts, fair enough. Are you unemployed even if you don't do any work? No, you're not unemployed because you've got a 0 hours contract. Unfair universal credit sanctions as well. Other dodges too, all used to pretend that there are fewer people unemployed than really are. Johnson again responded, as he has in the past, by saying he's helping people with the cost of living and that he can only do that because the economy is strong. But I really don't get how this is a good strategic lie. If the economy is so good, why can't people have pay rises to afford the very high cost? Governor of the Bank of England saying that workers shouldn't ask for pay rises. Boris Johnson saying they should actually take pay cuts. That's what he said recently. Workers should actually agree to pay cuts to help the economy. Thought the economy was strong. You can't have it both ways. Either Johnson has the ability to help people, in which case they will expect to be helped. Are people being helped to afford the cost of living explosion? No, they are not. Petrol went up again this week, so that must mean the economy is buggered. But wait, Johnson says the economy is strong. So the government's refusal to help with things like price caps or dropping taxes on fuel is a political decision to screw people over, is it? I really don't see how there's any good spin on that comment from Johnson. And I've said it before, you can get voters to believe all sorts of ridiculous lies, like the stupidest lies. But it works best when voters are getting by all right in life. You know, they're fine, they're having the time of their life, or at least they're getting by, drudging on. And they read the Daily Mail and go, oh, that's terrible. And then they don't think about it. But when they're not interested in pointless arguments. They want to see action. Another reason why Labour should be pushing some of their policies much harder in these exchanges. I get, like, you know, I've said before, they neither need nor want to be too detailed. Of course they don't. No point constraining yourself too far from the election, but just push the odd one that you know you're going to be pursuing anyway. Starmer also attacked Johnson's failure to heed the warnings of high inflation last year. Prime Minister famously denied that inflation was going to be bad. Here we are. So the questions were following a path of, first of all, demonstrating poor economic performance, then high taxes, problems for business, a Prime Minister who doesn't actually know what's going on, because everyone else knew inflation was going to go high, not Boris Johnson, and one who spends all of his time defending his failures instead of actually spending that time trying to work out how to be useful. And then Starmer finished off by quoting some things Tory MPs had said. Again, and he should do this for every last question. Remember, the last question, Boris Johnson's going to come back with a load of rubbish. You're never going to get a question answered at the end. So you might as well use it to not just have some fun, but to just make points, make statements. You know, and he quoted some things Tory MPs had said about Boris Johnson, including describing him as the Conservative Corbyn. Said that this was not intended as a compliment.
Which of you was it? Which of you? Come on. Can't win back trust. Anybody owning up? You're very quiet now. Hands. Mr. Speaker, my personal favourite is this. This is a document circulated by his backbench, in which they call him the Conservative Corbyn. Exactly. Prime Minister, I don't think that was intended as a compliment.
Then Ian Blackford, much like last week, abandoned any interest in asking actual questions. Could be argued, what's the point when you don't get answered? But the SNP have been gearing up for a new phase in preparation for the next Scottish independence referendum. It's a bit all over the place at the moment. But I'll go through the latest in a video this weekend. I think it needs it. But Blackford plugged the public consultation that the Scottish Government have just launched. We're told that we can expect a referendum of some sort next autumn. So that was his main plug there. Now, obviously, this drew the response from Boris Johnson that the UK performs better together. All right, yeah. And don't get me wrong, I agree. But not what he said about the EU, was it? Indeed, it was in response to Ian Blackford that my quote from the start of the video came. But I'll discuss that and piss a lot of people off, I'm sure, in equal measure in a later video. Finally, I will just reference Ed Davey's question here, the Lib Dem leader. Now, he only gets one, so I don't usually bother because, like I say, when you've got like one question, Johnson can easily bounce a single question. As soon as you don't get to come back at him, what you're asking largely has no, you're just making a statement. You know, the trick is to use a second question to drill down on a response, but only Keir Starmer and Ian Blackford get that. So Davey gets no such opportunity, to be fair to him. But he did talk about the by-election that they're hoping to take off the Tories next week. And Johnson said that people didn't even know what the Lib Dems' policies are. Now, this is probably true enough, but couldn't that line be used against him in a couple of weeks? After all, if Boris Johnson loses a safe Tory seat to a party whose policies are a mystery to the public, what does that say about the Conservatives? But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships, and until next time, I'll see you later.